please find a table and a seat, and yeah, have a seat. There are no definitive seats. Take a chair and sit down, please. Welcome to this open meeting. Please have a seat. Just sit wherever you want. At any table is fine. If you need interpretation into English, because we will have some speakers on English. Yeah, if you want interpretation from English to Swedish, you can sit with Per-Åke down in the room, in the physical meeting room, not on Zoom, it seems. Now it seems like we've all found a seat, so we will start. Welcome everyone to this open meeting arranged by Rättvisepartiet Socialisterna and International Socialist Alternative. It's been an intense week with a lot of protests, demonstrations, and we've had a lot of campaigning on the streets, and we start with national speakers and international speakers that will talk about the climate struggle across the globe and also here in Sweden. So it's nice to see new faces. You are very warmly welcome. We will have different speakers, both in Swedish and English. I think there will be some interpretation. I hope you won't be disturbed by that. It's just persons that are interpreting for others. So I will welcome our first speaker, Katja Retz. That is welcome to come up here. She's a elected trade union official, and she put out a motion that her trade union should support and participate in the Fridays for Future climate strike. And she will talk about the role of the working class. Thank you. A round of applause here. Very good. 50 years of debate on the environment and climate has shown one thing above all. We need a radical transformation of society if we are serious about stopping climate change. Other speakers will elaborate on this today, but one thing I want to stress is that those in power, whether in positions of authority or in politics, will not implement what is needed. The trade union movement needs to understand its role in the climate struggle. The political establishment is trying to focus on what individuals can do to fight climate change. At the same time, the fight for jobs is set in opposition to the fight for climate, something that even some trade union leaders have bought into. These are smokescreens that seal the plundering of our common resources in the pursuit of profits. Trade unions can play an important role in exposing this logic. To question the profit motive is to go to the heart of the whole capitalist system. And for that, we need organization and determination. The organized strength of workers in trade unions is the potential force that, with strike as its weapon, can challenge power relations. And Fridays for Future has rightly called on trade unions to join the climate struggle and call a political strike. Unfortunately, trade union leaders globally only gave limited support. In Sweden, nothing basically. Climate change will not disappear. On the contrary, we are approaching more and more different tipping points. The capitalists will feel them and will be forced to take certain measures, which will always be inadequate when the profit motive rules. We can be sure that the price of the climate crisis will be passed on to workers and young people, just as we're already seeing today with the rising cost of living. To bury our heads in the sand, as some union leaders do, and hoping for the best will not stop it. It is about being prepared and taking the fight. The climate crisis may worsen the working environment, which then needs to be defended. Jobs may be lost, and same time, new kinds of jobs may emerge that need union struggle for good wages and working conditions, and the gig economy is a warning. The Swedish trade union movement has become extremely weakened the last 30 years in terms of membership, but even more politically. Few workers, even those 40 or 50 years old, have ever been on a strike. Consensus with business has been like the watchword for union leaders, not to advance workers' positions, but in hope of preventing the worst things. It is the employers who have been on the offensive, inflicting several serious defeats on the labor movement in regards to right to strike and employment protection. And to reach out to the climate movement and taking inspiration from it in methods of struggle and power of action is exactly what the labor movement globally need, but especially in Sweden needs. I'm a socialist, and as a socialist in the trade union movements, it's not enough to complain in frustration that so little is happening. I know that there are several of us here who are perhaps alone or only a handful active in their respective unions. It is not possible at this stage to influence the direction of entire trade unions. As socialists, we're active where there are struggles outside and within trade unions, and it's possible to influence a few and then perhaps more to point out what is needed and show examples of struggle. Karl Marx wrote over 100 years ago that all trade union struggle is political struggle. He argued that the task of trade unions is not only to fight for higher wages, but to abolish wage slavery. The climate crisis today gives even more weight to his words, as the class struggle is ultimately about the survival of the planet as we know it today. Thank you. Thank you, Katja. Fantastic to be in the same party as you. We will welcome next speaker, Raymond Stocki. Round of applause for him. Raymond is an after-school teacher and Indigenous rights activist, and we'll talk about the struggle against forestry and mining. Swedish politicians and companies are using greenwashing and racism to avoid the demands that needs to be made to get us out of the climate crisis alive. There are two important industries in Sweden that play a major role economically, geopolitically, and in how we will tackle the climate crisis. It's mining and forestry. Both are exploitations of natural resources that in this capitalist system can never be green. The mining industry is responsible for enormous emissions in production and major interventions in nature, pollutions, poisoning of local environment. Forestry is clearly an exploitative activity. Clear cutting is now a problem that Sweden is very alone in using. Species disappear, ecological diversity wiped out, carbon sinks disappear, and wetlands are destroyed. Together with green investments, mining and forestry are major obstacles in reindeer herding. one of the last outposts of Sami culture. Exploitation of natural resources cuts off and physically and directly interferes with reindeer herding, but also in the long term, as grazing is destroyed by forestry, water is poisoned by mines, and emissions are fueling climate change more rapidly. What were once emergency measures have now become common. For example, reindeer grazing in winter is mostly consistent of emergency feed due to climate change and forestry. Swedish government notoriously refuses to sign the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, and the state has still not even come up with an apology for the injustices suffered by the Sami people, from the racial biology, grave robbing, forced labor in the mining industry, assimilation that crushed language and religion, or the forced relocation that split families and created conflicts between different Sami people. And about 10 years ago, Swedish mineral policy has discussed with a boom of mining prospecting and projects that rose like stars, but then fell. Then we were talking about the mineral tax, which is 2 per thousand of the value of minerals, but only half per thousand goes to the state. So what is taken out of the ground does not even go to society, but to profits, corporate profits. When the Social Democratic government decided on the permit for a mine in Gallok, it pitted reindeer husbandry against mining without a single word about the climate. It's the same government that Ministry of Industry and Commerce, Carl Petter Thorvaldsen, said loves mines. And recently, there's been a lot of struggle against capitalist predation, against the exploitation of natural resources, climate, and for the environment. Ojnareskogen, Repparefjorden, Jukkosvaara, and so on. There are some of the places where struggle has been the spotlight in recent years. Several battles have been won, others continue. The common thing is that without struggle, everything would be lost. But if we fight, we can win. Sami fighters have, together with climate activists, stopped logging machines, prevented mining operations with their bodies, protected for the right to continue with Sami culture, advocated for clean lands and fresh water. Today, the mining lobby and politicians use jobs as a stick in the debate. As socialists, we defend indigenous rights, the climate, the environment, the jobs. But we must fight for a society that is planned and governed together on the basis and the needs of people, nature, climate. We must invest in jobs, but in a green transformation or ecological forestry and so on. Here is working class is important. Workers can stop the economy if they strike, but workers in mining, forestry, and reindeer herding will all be equally affected by climate change. Ecologically sustainable forestry would need more working in the forest, but with today's slash and burn and rapid exports, jobs are becoming fewer. Recycling of metals and a truly green development would also need more workers. Sami livelihoods and cultural practices has to given a special status, and local people must have a veto over mining and deforestation. That's why we have to fight against capitalism. A different world is possible without oppression and exploitation, which is why I am fighting for socialism. Excuse me. Thank you, Raymond. Now it's Miriam Poesat, so from Socialist Party in Ireland, and she will talk about how different struggles are connected and how we can achieve real change. So she will speak in English, so I would be quiet here.
I lost my voice, so I hope that's going to be okay. So working class people across the world, including the frontline workers who ran our world during the pandemic, are facing peaking energy costs. That's part of a deepening economic crisis that is also causing huge hikes in food prices and in food shortages. Still, while this is happening, while working class people are facing the worst crisis possible, The 5 largest energy companies are continuing to make $2,600 in profit every second. And the capitalist ruling class, those at the top who privately own the majority of big businesses and companies, will not make the changes that we need. It's been proven many times with COP26, with Stockholm+50 this week. Why? Because their system cannot allow it. Because under capitalism, the short-term profit of a wealthy minority is the priority. And worse than that, the climate crisis, the war, and the recent attacks on abortion rights in the US and internationally has shown us a system in complete and utter crisis that is constantly dragging us backwards. So enough with the chit-chats. We cannot just sit at the table with the bosses, negotiate, and hope for the best. It's urgent that we break with capitalism now. And unless we organize mass struggles from below to force change out of the hands of the establishments, those at the top will not only refuse to grant us significant reforms, but they will also roll back on significant rights that we previously won through struggle, like Roe versus Wade in the US. But what does organizing mass struggles mean? Because people are angry. I think everyone in this room is angry. I think everyone that was at the protest today is angry. And I think all of us, cannot stand the disgusting system we live in. So how the hell do we turn this anger into real concrete change? So back in 2018, Greta Thunberg, in this very same city of Stockholm, started the incredibly vital Fridays for Future movement that was spread internationally, with millions, literally millions, taking to the streets globally in 2019. And not only was the spirit of these actions really important to revive, with the idea of building up pressure on a weekly basis, but repopularizing the weapon of strike action against climate change was a key development that we need to continue to build on. Because it was mentioned by speakers before, but if the workers who create the profits that those at the top love to steal followed the steps of the school students, took these ideas of mass strikes actions into the workplaces, they could really put a hold on the economy and create enough pressure on the big polluting companies, but also on the capitalist system as a whole. But organizing for change is not only urgent, it's also possible. If you only take the last 2 years, because you could talk about like decades of examples of struggles, but the past 2 years, the deepening crisis and the increasing attacks on workers and young people's rights have led to unavoidable tensions and conflicts and translated into important breaking points. So you had the Black Lives Matter uprising, you had the new feminist wave, the uprisings in Chile and Myanmar, the general strikes very recently in Sri Lanka, and so many more. And so all these explosions obviously are a reflection of the deeply unstable era that we live in, and the reflection of anger bubbling up under the surface that is really ready to pop. But they are also a reflection of the potential that exists for us to fight back, because there is nothing more threatening to a system like capitalism that is based on exploitation and oppression than all of the oppressed and all of the exploited of this world coming together, challenging backwards racist, sexist, transphobic ideas, and uniting in a common interest against a system that affects all of us. And the beginning of unionization in Amazon, the company Amazon, and in over 100 of Starbucks in the United States, who are like two, very like mega union busting and deeply exploitative companies, are really giving us a glimpse at what is possible when workers organize in solidarity. It's giving us a glimpse at what would be possible if workers use their unions to organize democratic debates and discussions in society, in the workplace, in the working class movement, about program, about tactics, demands that can really achieve real victories, from obviously reforms around climate justice, around oppression, inequality, exploitation, but also to full system and socialist change. And of course, socialism would not solve problems overnight, right? But it would mean bringing the biggest companies into public ownership and democratic control for all of us to have a say in what those companies invest in. It would mean ensuring that those companies are either quickly converted to sustainable production, or that workers would be offered alternative employment in the new green sectors with better pay and better conditions in each case. It would mean building a world where people and the planet would come first in an economy that is planned in our interests, not in the interest of profit and competition. And the best news today, I think, is that all of us here don't have to reinvent the wheel. There are lessons from history and from recent struggles that we can learn from to achieve these changes. For example, young and working class people in the United States right now are looking at the successful abortion rights struggle that they had in the 1960s and 70s, but they're also are looking at the recent historic victories internationally. They're looking at Ireland, they're looking at Argentina, Mexico, and so on to be able to defend and organize against the attacks on Roe v. Wade. And so if you wanted to join ISA as well, you'd be joining an organization that has played key roles in the successful struggles for abortion rights in Ireland, for $15 minimum wage in the US, for housing here in Sweden, and so much more. And you'd be joining an organization that is doing important work in China, Hong Kong, and Russia, places where fighting for freedom is more dangerous than ever. And so you'd be joining a real international, constantly growing and working together like this week at Stockholm+50. So at a time where people are looking for an alternative, you could be part of building an organization that helps push those democratic debates and discussion in the working class movement to talk about what capitalism is, how organized it is, how organized we need to be to build consistent movements filled with the best methods and the best demands that break away with the logic of a system that aims to divide us in the name of profit. So in case I wasn't clear enough, sign up and join ISA today. Thank you.
Thank you, Miriam. And yes, as she said, join ISA today, talk to someone here, and discuss with someone who's a member here after this meeting. Now I want to present Mattias Bernhardsson. Welcome up. Mattias is campaign organizer for Preserve Forest, Archipelago and Cultural Landscape of Haninge, and #1 on the election ballot for Rättvisepartiet Socialisterna in Haninge. Thank you. There's a unprecedented hunt for profit at the expense of our last untouched natural environment. Forest, beaches, marine environment, mountains, cultural landscapes, and monuments that Raymond was talking about are being exploited at an insane rate. The enormous emissions are fueled by this. And there are increasingly dramatic climate change. What is needed is a socialist policy based on the interest and needs of both the environment and the broad majority of the people, not the richest 1% of the polluters who are behind this. If we look at the entire climate policy from the government has been built around the lie that biofuels, burning mainly forest for energy, is the best alternative to fossil fuels. But the fact that 25% of Sweden's greenhouse gas emissions come from the soils in the clearing since decades ago. Under this government with Social Democrats, but also with the so-called Green Party that was a part of the government before, the protection of species and habitats have deteriorated, private ownership of the forest have been strengthened, inventories of key biotopes have been stopped, as they've realized that if there are no natural values recorded, it will be easier to log. If the loggings continue at the current rate, there will be no original forest left in 20 years, except in already protected areas, and even not reserves are protected in reality. In Haninge, where I live, more than 180 forest areas have now been registered for logging with the Swedish Forest Agency. 30 of these areas are within reserves. The government and forest industry say that we never had so much forest in Sweden, but don't confuse a forest with a timber swamp. Cutting down forest, plowing up the land, and planting in straight lines does not make a forest. It only gives remnants of the former wildlife that can be found in a planted forest. And it is in these dry woodlands that are also leading to increasingly large and violent fires that will be an even bigger global problem in the future. Rättvisepartiet, Socialisterna, is not the only party to demand a halt to logging in all forests. We're also taking concrete action against deforestation. If we are elected in September, we will have access to logging plans long before they become public. And we won't do business as usual and sit quietly. We will leak every plan to environmental organizations, residents, and those affected. And we know that fighting and organizing pays off. Together with locals and campaigns and residents and so, we have helped to save 6 natural areas and forests in Haninge. And we have so much more that we want to achieve. Also, our last untouched beaches are rapidly diminishing. It is when the rich wants to build luxury housing and gated communities where we before could walk freely. It's a privatization of the right to roam, where a layer doesn't want to live with the rest of us in the working class. But it is not small gated policies or housing that will solve the big housing crisis. It's low-cost public housing close to public transport, service, and welfare and infrastructure that will. We stand for a completely clear-cut free forestry. This is perfectly feasible today, as at least 75% of forest extraction is not necessary. We need timber to build climate smart. It accounts for 22%. The rest is biofuel and pulp. Paper and pulp, which are used for short-lived products, can be completely replaced. Reed flax and hemp yields 3 to 4 times more pulp and can be harvested every few months or years rather than once every half or full century. We could exclude all biologically valuable forests and switch to non-clear-cut practices in the remaining forests. Then the forest will remain a forest when we only take what we need. Our policy of conversion, recycling, reuse would create tens of thousands of new jobs.
Men det här är inte möjligt under kapitalismen. Det här är inte möjligt om man bara tänker på nästa kvartals vinster som går rakt ner i privata fickor. Det kräver gemensamt ägande men också arbetarkontroll. Det kräver socialism. Det vi känner idag som demokrati, som är reducerat till att rösta en gång var 4:e år, att den demokratin utvidgas till varje dag och kontroll över hela ekonomin. På en daglig basis. Såväl en kontroll över de naturresurser
and control over the natural resources that the future generations will inherit. Thank you. Excuse me.
Tack så jättemycket, Mattias.
Thank you, Mattias.
Nu vill jag välkomna upp
I want to welcome an artist
konstnär,
and painter, Shamiram Adam.
Välkommen upp. Kan vi få lite hjälp med mikrofonerna?
Can we get some help with the microphone here? Here we go. Okay, so she's gonna play some music for us here.
Fint att vara här.
It's so nice to be here to sing a bit. I will sing two songs.
En från Rättvik.
One from Rättvik.
Malung.
And one from Malung.
Den andra
one with guitar and the other a cappella.
Och Shamiram Adam.
Shamiram Adam is my name. So now I will be quiet when she plays.
Till himmelen, dit längtar jag, där man får leva med behag, där livets krona för mig står, den jag så länge väntat på. Så lång lev, i synnerhet om kvällarna, när kullor är bort i bud om dem, och pojkar är bort i land om dem. Till himmelen, dit längtar jag, där man får leva med behag, där livets krona för mig står, den jag så länge väntat på. Jag tror jag måste dricka lite vatten.
I think I have to drink some water. Yeah, she's just pointing to the glass of water that she wants. Here we go.
Så himla fint att få vara här.
It's so nice to be here and fantastic speeches. And thank you so much.
Det här är en visa.
This is a song, a summer song. I think it's quite fitting now when we actually have a bit of summer sun. And this song is after Dance Edvard is a song in Malungen. So now I will be quiet again.
Sommartid, så skön och kär, som på besök i Norden är, att liv och glädje sprida. Den svarta mullar täckt med grön, och varje gren med löv så skön. I skog och lund vida. Se bäcken hur hon skön och klar utöver mörka hällen far, där älvorna det
stranden ljuva sippor stå, som sina kalkar nu slå. I skog och lunder vida.
Thank you.
Tack Shamiran.
Thank you.
Helt fantastiskt. Tack för att du kunde vara med här idag.
Fantastic that you could be here today.
Då välkomnar jag upp Boel.
I will welcome Boel up
Bernmark.
now. Boel Bernmark.
Hi. So I just want to know, all the people who are listening in English, are you able to hear while I'm like talking?
De får översättning. Så
Yeah.
du ska tala på svenska.
Yeah. Boel will speak in Swedish and I will interpret.
Det har gått okej hittills, så jag...
Yeah, it's been fine so far. So I hope you've been enjoying this from me here. Since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the climate issue has basically disappeared from the debate. But it's not so strange that we...
Tala i mikrofonen.
Ja, så. Okej, jag börjar om.
Okay, she will restart.
Ända sedan den ryska invasionen,
Since the Russian invasion against Ukraine, the climate issue has basically disappeared from the debate. But it's not so strange
att vi liksom byter fokus från framtidens kriser
focus from
till kriget i Ukraina,
of the future
vars
to
dödliga
the war
konsekvenser
in
vi kan
Ukraine,
se varje dag.
whose
Vi har
deadly
sett varje
consequences
dag
we
hela
can
den här
see
våren.
every day and seen every day during this spring.
Och jag är inte här för att säga åt
I'm
dem
not
att
here
byta fokus.
to say that we should shift focus.
Jag är här för att berätta
I'm
hur
here to
dessa
say,
kriser hänger ihop.
to tell how these crises are connected.
Så man kan inte stoppa global
You
uppvärmning
can't stop
utan att stoppa
global warming
man kan
without
inte stoppa
stopping
krig
war.
utan att
And
stoppa
we
global
can't stop
uppvärmning.
war without stopping global warming.
Krig innebär direkt
War
miljöförstörelse.
means
Då
environmental
natur fattar
destruction.
eld,
When nature
sprängs
is
av
caught on
bomber,
fire,
eller
blown up
skövlas
by
av
bombs,
militärfordon.
or are
Krig förgiftar
cut
också
down by
luften vi
military
andas, marken vi odlar
vehicles.
och
It
vattnet vi...
poisons the air we breathe, the food we eat, the water we drink.
Sorry. Men krig innebär också enorma utsläpp av
Also
växthusgaser.
means enormous emissions of greenhouse gas.
USA har den absolut största armén i världen.
Has the biggest
absolut
army
största
in the world,
militären i världen.
the biggest military in the world.
Och mellan år
And
2001
between
och
2001 and 2017, the US military has emitted what is the equivalent of 1,200
miljoner ton koldioxid
million
i atmosfären.
ton. I think I got that right. In the atmosphere.
USA's Department of Defense var ett
The
eget
US
land.
Department of Defense.
Skulle det bara
if
finnas
it was
46 länder i
a
världen
country,
som släpper
only
ut mer
46
koldioxid än det.
countries would emit more
Militärlandet.
carbon dioxide compared to this imaginary
I det långa
military
loppet
country. In the long
kommer
run,
krig att förändra klimatet.
war
Och det kommer rubba världens
will
ekosystem.
change the climate because it will disrupt
Trasiga
the
ekosystem och ett
ecological
förändrat klimat
environment.
lägger grunden för nya
Changed
krig.
climate and broken
kommer uppstå
ecosystem
nya
will be the
konflikter.
foundations for new wars.
Olika stater
There will
och
be
faktioner
new conflicts, new
kommer
states and
kriga mot
functions
varandra för att
will
kontrollera
war against each
olika
other to
naturresurser.
control different
Och nu
natural
kommer det inte längre bara
resources.
handla om olja,
Now it will not
eller
just be
gas
about
eller mineraler.
oil, gas or minerals. It will also be about arable soil and clean drinking water. And big countries like China and the US or really anyone that has an interest of controlling these resources will intervene, and mostly for the sake of business. Like when the ice around Greenland is melting. There's a feedback loop of war, destroying the environment that leads to war. But instead of doing anything about the climate, the states across the world are continuing to increase their military budget. Here in Sweden, the military budget will increase with 2% of the GDP to join NATO. It's an increase with more than 30 billion kronor, which is 3 billion euros. And with this money, we would have been able to employ 100,000 nurses or implemented free public transport or prepared to help refugees, which will be needed more and more, considering what we have discussed here so far. And you probably heard that we can't have unlimited growth on a planet with finite resources. And under capitalism, business have one function, to maximize profit. And to do this, they will sooner or later need to expand to new markets and use new resources. Under capitalism, it's in the interests of nations. With the nation, I don't mean the interest of the people. I mean, like the nation, the state. It would be in their interest to help the private sector to find new markets or new resources outside of the country's boundaries. States have different techniques to do this. They can give poorer states support in the change of them giving them natural resources. They can give them loans. And they have to give them natural resources in order to pay back. And if businesses really wants another country's resources, that state that is dependent on the business can use military to achieve this. If an economic system requires that we murder each other and destroy the only planet we have, it's a system that needs to go.
Okay.
And a round of applause. I'm not done. Hold your applause. If we want to save the planet, we need an international collaboration between the climate movement, workers movement, and the anti-war movement. And now I'm done. And now they're applauding.
Tack Boel från Unga Socialister.
Thank you Boel from
Nu vill jag
Young
presentera Arne
Socialist.
Miller. Varsågod upp på scen.
Now I want to present Arne Miller.
Journalist
Arne is a well-known writer
om
and author about books about mining industry and energy politics. So that I hope can answer how green is the so-called green transformation. It's easy to believe that it is industry that would save the climate. When you hear the Swedish politicians speak, you can believe it's an industry that will fix this. The accolades have been many for the companies planning to build so-called fossil-free steel mills, battery factories, sustainable aviation fuel, and green fertilizers. But by now, it should be obvious to everyone, actually, that private companies are not in the business of saving the world. That's not what they want to do. The motivation is obviously to maximize the return of their invested capital. This quest for profit is almost always at odds with a sustainable development. We see this in steel production, where they want to replace fossil fuels with hydrogen and create steel that will drastically lessen their carbon emissions. It's good that it comes this sort of new technology which will reduce carbon dioxide emissions from an industry that accounts for 7% of global carbon dioxide emissions. But if you just continue producing as much steel as today, or rather increase the production of steel, this equation does not connect, because it needs enormous need for electricity to produce this steel. If you would do this in the whole world, that in and of itself would mean that the need for electricity would increase by 20 to 25% in just one industry. But there are a lot of other industries that they want to converse in the same sense, and with more electricity. And this is a problem for the conversion, because today the wind and solar expansion is not even covering the entire increase in world energy use. And if you add this enormous amount of electricity that is needed, you shift the point when you transform this conversion to green. We have a new Minister of Industry and Commerce that started his career by saying that he loves mines. And the mines are being highlighted as the spearhead of the climate transitions. Electric cars, wind turbines, solar panels require large amount of metals and different metals. In recent years, Swedish mining industry has also begun to talk about reduced carbon emissions and so on, and they've had ads about electric trucks and so on. But the facts says something else. If you look at the statistics, the Swedish mines has increased its emissions since 2008 until today, an increase with 50%. And that is because while they've had some electric trucks and other measures, the production has also increased a lot. So not even there is a green transition that has been started. We also see mining companies that very purposefully, but on false grounds, are trying to portray themselves as a part of the green transition. A few years ago, there was a company named Aura Energy and Scandinavium that were looking for vanadium in Jämtland, but also in the south of Sweden, in Skåne. They said that this was needed for batteries for wind turbine parks and so on. But the truth is, this was just one of the energy things that is at an experimental thing. What was really driving up this was new building regulations in China that drove up the price of vanadium. So this is just some of the ways that they're trying to hook onto the green transformations on a false grounds. Another industry that has been highlighted is the Swedish forest industry in climate change. They have launched a number of projects using where the raw materials is not just used for housing and pulp, but also as a source of energy.
planerna på att
tillverka
sånt som flygbränsle eller bränsle för lastbilar med hjälp av skogsråvara, då går ekvationen inte ihop. Det var en professor på Skogshögskolan i Umeå som tittade på det här. Han gjorde den här beräkningen. Han skrev en rapport som heter Skogen räcker inte. Hur ska vi prioritera? Det är väl ovanligt mycket klarspråk för att komma från en professor vid ett universitet.
Coming from a professor
Och
from the university.
I Sverige,
And this is the situation in Sweden, a country where there are many times more pines and trees than people. So if you try to do this at an international level, it's even more impossible.
Det är möjligt att
It
klara
is possible to meet the climate challenge and new technological developments
stål med annat än
for
fossila
example,
bränslen.
create
Det
steel
kan
with
ju
something
vara ett
else
väldigt bra
than fossil
hjälpmedel för att
fuels
klara klimatomställningen.
could be an important tool
Men
to
det här är bara
tackle
möjligt
climate change.
om den här
This is
teknologin
only
förenas med
possible
en
if it
väldigt
is
noggrann
combined
och planerad
with very carefully
hushållning
planned
med el och metaller
management
som
of
styrs utifrån vilka
electricity and
behov
metals
som finns
that
i
are
samhället och att man
from the
strävar efter
needs
en
of
rättvis
society
fördelning av de
and strive
begränsade
for a
resurserna.
fair distribution
Och det
of
här, det är
limited
ju
resources.
raka motsatsen
And this is
till
the
den
exact
riktning dit
opposite of the
marknadskrafterna drar.
direction which
Det gör
market
att vi kommer att
forces are
fortsätta att se
pulling.
rader av exempel
That's what we
på
will see
företag som
rows of
lovar
examples
att
of
vara
companies
klimatneutrala,
promising to be
att lovar
climate
att vara
neutral and
fossilfria och
promise to be
gröna.
fossil free
Men det
and
kommer
green,
alltid att
but there will
finnas
always
en eller
be
annan hake
a
med de här
downside
löftena.
with these
De
promises.
kommer inte att hålla
They
vad
will
de
not
lovar.
be able
Anyhow.
to keep what they promise. Thank you.
Tack så jättemycket Arne.
Thank you, Arne.
Yara
And now
upp
it's
på
Yara
scenen.
Cliff.
Yara är
Yara
från Socialist
is
Alternative.
from Socialist
Det är
Alternative.
USA, i England,
ISA
Wales och Skottland
in
och kommer att prata
Wales,
om vårat
of
svar när
Scotland,
världen skakas om
who
av
will
krig och
talk about
klimatförstörelse
our
och nationalism,
answer when the
nämligen
world is
internationalismen.
created
Varsågod.
or is
Thank you,
yeah,
everyone.
war
Thank you
and
for
climate
being here.
crisis and so on.
Sorry for my voice, but we just came from the protest after all. And it's beyond a privilege to be standing here with so many familiar and also unfamiliar faces. We are speaking here about one of the most important drivers of struggle in our lifetime, the climate. And I don't need to repeat why it's so important. I think the other speakers did a great job doing that. But I do want to kind of re-emphasize one element of it. So we're in Sweden right now, but many of us have come from afar, some more than others, but all of us came together to join this fight. And this isn't a coincidence. The climate crisis is perhaps the most glaring example of the fact that exploitation knows no boundaries and no borders. Our planet is one, and the destruction of it harms every single working class person on it, regardless of the governments that we live under. From the Indian Peninsula, where we're seeing a scorching heat wave made 30 times worse by global warming, to the west coast of America and Australia, where devastating wildfires have become a routine, the impact of this capitalist climate crisis is hurting ordinary people the world over. And it's simply not going to be enough, even if one country decided to completely shut down all of their emissions. And it's becoming clearer and clearer that the only real alternative will have to be a global one. And well, we're also pointing out that it can't just be a global alternative. Hall says to be a socialist alternative. If you want to call it an international socialist alternative, you can do that as well. Because without the collective power of workers, without an economy and an industry that is designed democratically in the interest of people all around the world, we're going to have an economy like we do now. One that's for the profit of capitalists, of a tiny minority, and not for us. One that's had 50 years of UN blah, blah, blah talks and no real results. And in order to get there, we need to build a mass movement that will be able to say goodbye to this rotten capitalist system that's destroying our planet and build a real social solution that will save our lives. And this is what we're doing here at ISA in over 30 countries around the world. So obviously we just came from a big protest, but last November, 300 members of the ISA from around the world participated in the 100,000 strong COP26 protest in Glasgow. In the pouring rain, we called out the leaders willing to shell out even less than lip service, knowing that the largest delegation was actually oil company lobbyists. And our block was vibrant and it was impressive, without a doubt, the most energetic block of the demo, pulling many young people around us with slogans like global warming is a war of the rich against the poor, and our movement is unstoppable, a socialist world is possible. We also intervened in the Fridays for Future protest in Glasgow that same week with a speaker from our organization at the rally alongside Greta Thunberg, making the connection to the trade union movement as well. And we also organized a successful march in Edinburgh on the same day. And our bold intervention has allowed us to gather more people around us in the area in Scotland. And now we have a lively branch that is ready to take on even more climate action and other actions in Scotland. But COP wasn't the only activity the ISA had for the climate in the last period. Here in Sweden, our members have taken an active role in anti-deforestation and mining protests. We've heard a little bit about that today. Standing shoulder to shoulder with the Sami indigenous population, the local community and environmental groups to protect 1,400 red alerted species threatened with extinction by the persons. And in Brazil, which plays a huge role in the climate crisis due to the Amazon rainforest, ISA members are regularly intervening in the Indigenous movement and young people together fighting against the Bolsonaro regime, mounting roadblocks and occupations to protect land. And alongside this, our members have led a struggle against the privatization of water companies, working within the Waterworks Union. In Belgium, our comrades engaged in the climate movement, organizing school committees throughout the country. And we also engaged through opposition in the trade union movement and built a combative front against industrial pollution and for safe working and living environments. The Middle East and North Africa, which is one of the regions that's most significantly affected by the climate crisis, because it's warming at double the global average, is another important location for ISA work. Our members in Israel, Palestine, are heavily involved with Youth for Climate, and are connecting the climate crisis with solidarity with Palestinians and politicizing the work, helping to set up a climate protest tent encampment in front of the Israeli parliament, which is scheduled for the end of June. In Austria, ISA has taken an active role in organizing upcoming discussions to connect the fight against the climate crisis with trade unions and workplace battles, and they're taking inspiration from Bosch workers and Fridays for Future in Munich. We've also been supporting an ongoing occupation of a construction site of a tunnel project, so that's really impressive as well. In South Africa, members of the organization are intervening in protests against the Department of Minerals, Resources and Energy, which is driving to expand extractive industries. And these protests have actually been going on since September, but the government has doubled down on this due to the war, and our comrades are preparing to fight back again now. And this is just a small taste of what our organization has been up to. And I know I'm running a little bit out of time, so I'd like to finish by calling everyone in this room who is sick of doom scrolling on their phone, sick of empty promises, sick of this blah, 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 and is ready for action to join us. Let's build this movement and fight for a real socialist alternative to a crisis that just can't be solved under capitalism. Thank you.
Tack så mycket, Yara.
Thank you, Yara. And now
Jonas
we will try to get Jonas
upp, som är kommunfullmäktigeledamot för Rättvisepartiet
Socialisterna in Luleå.
Summera det här mötet.
He will sum up this meeting.
Ja, men precis.
Yep. He says yes, indeed.
Tack så mycket och
tack
för att ni har hållit er vakna efter att ha varit på alla de här protesterna idag och skrikit som galningar. Och jag vill också tacka alla som har så fantastiska inlägg i den här diskussionen. Vi förberett för att vi ska få en så bra upplevelse som möjligt och även musiken var fantastisk. Så att det här har varit ett superbra möte och till skillnad från det här FN-miljömötet så har ju det här mötet visat på konkret kamp och konkret agerande av socialister som är inblandade i att stoppa det här systemets liksom förstörelse av vår planet. Mot nya ohållbara gruvor, mot skogsskövling och så vidare och så vidare. Både här i Sverige och som jag har berättat nu senast internationellt. Och det är ju så att ju mer oförmögen kapitalismen visar sig vara med att göra en hållbar omställning, desto mer extrem blir ju den här greenwashingen. Och jag har det nu liksom reklamen på tunnelbanan här i Stockholm när det står utan gruvor så finns det inga elbilar. Och det är ju liksom en helt sinnessjuk kampanj från gruvlobbyn. Det är ju precis tvärtom. Med alla de här gruvsatsningarna så har vi ingen klimatframtid. Det behövs återbruk, det behövs återvinning och det behövs planering där mineralerna används på ett sätt som vi efter de behov som finns helt enkelt. Inte slösas på lyxjakter eller nya flygplatser eller vad det må vara för någonting. Sveriges regering har ju en väldigt hög internationell svansföring när det gäller miljö- och klimatfrågor. Men inför det här miljömötet så har de ju verkligen kommit på med byxorna nere.
But during this UN
av alla miljö- och klimatmål som har satts i det här landet sedan det första miljömötet 1972 så har 3 av 4 mål inte nåtts. Och bara flera av de här målen är de absolut viktigaste och grundläggande som levande skogar eller biologisk mångfald eller icke förgiftade vattendrag. Det har man misslyckats med. De här misslyckandena har ju gått så långt nu så att när alla de här höjdarna flögs in till Stockholm, transporterades med limousin till toppmötet, Säpo stängde av halva stan, så har de inte ens ambitionen att komma överens om målsättningen med mötet. Det är att prata. Och liksom Sveriges utrikesminister Ann Linde sa ja, det kan vara viktigt att prata. Och liksom, det blir helt bisarrt när man ser vad som händer i världen. Det är 50 grader varmt i Indien och människor kan inte gå ut mitt på dagen för man riskerar livet. Vi måste vara ärliga. Vi måste säga vi lever i en farlig tid. Vi lever i en tid av krig, av upprustning, en tid av ökad fattigdom på grund av skenande priser, en tid av en accelererande klimatkris med en ekonomisk elit som styr oss mot en extremt allvarlig klimatkris i global skala. Och utifrån det här är det förstås lätt att bli uppgiven. Men jag tycker att det här mötet visar ju också att det finns hopp. Att det finns ett gryende motstånd. Det finns i global skala massrörelser som säger vi har fått nog. Som exempel med generalstrejken i Sri Lanka. Och det här är bara början. För att visserligen en viktig del av klimathotet är ju risken för tipppunkter vad det gäller klimatförändringarna. Som kan leda till liksom oåterkalleliga förändringar som vi inte kan förstå alla konsekvenser av och kan bli väldigt, väldigt allvarliga. Men vi måste också komma ihåg att vi kommer att se andra former av tipppunkter som har mer positiva konsekvenser. Tipppunkter i medvetenheten när klimatrörelser kan explodera i omfång och också som Katja sa i början involvera stora delar av arbetarklassen. För arbetare är trots allt de som drabbas hårdast av den här krisen. Vi kommer också se tipppunkter i kampen. Att när strejker och blockader vinner segrar, inte bara i klimatfrågor utan i andra frågor också, så kommer det inspirera till andra segrar. Det kommer inspirera till nya rörelser och till nya segrar. Vi kommer se tipppunkter i organiseringen av motståndet. Där det vi ser idag som kanske är isolerade öar av motstånd mot gruvor eller mot skogsskövling eller mot oljepipelines. Att de här kan koppla sig samman med andra rörelser och liksom inte bara stoppa miljöfarliga projekt utan också fälla liksom reaktionära regeringar. Och vi kommer att se tipppunkter i antikapitalistisk och socialistisk medvetenhet. Miljö- och klimatfrågan och krisen är kanske den allra viktigaste enskilda frågan som pekar på liksom att det här kapitalistiska systemet måste bort, som Boel pratade om. Det är helt sjukt. Vi kan inte ha ett system som föröder vår planet och som kastar in människor i krig. Och vi ser liksom att den här vinstjakten, den oändliga kapitalistiska tillväxten är totalt inkompatibel med en framtid som är värd namnet för oss. Storföretag, regeringar, de för krig mot klimatet, mot arbetares rätt att överleva på sin lön, mot grundläggande mänskliga rättigheter, som till exempel aborträtten som hotas nu i USA. Och jag menar, det är värre än någonsin. Vi har en reaktionär gyttja-politik som dominerar både i Sverige internationellt med liksom NATO-ansökan, med attack på människor i förorterna, nya gruvprojekt som Gallup och Cementa och även internationellt med krig, imperialism, auktoritära regimer. Som jag sa, liksom högsta domstolen i USA vill inskränka aborträtten. Och det är klart, liksom, det gör vår situation svår. Men det gör ju också att våra kamper, vårt motstånd knyts samman av det här systemet som vi drabbas av. Och det är både i Sverige och internationellt. Så att jag tänker att vi ska inte stå här och babbla hela kvällen. Vi tänkte att vi ska få prata med varandra. Det finns fika och fika efteråt och så. Men jag vill bara uppmana er som är här ikväll, för er som ser att det är systemet som är problemet. Och att svaret måste vara socialistiskt, svaret måste vara internationalistiskt. Då är det International Socialist Alternative som gäller. Och alla som har varit med i rummet, ni som har tittat på livestreamen och tycker att det här har varit bra givande, liksom kontakta oss och bli en del av den här kampen, för det behövs verkligen. Jag avslutar med det Gerhard sa. Our movement is unstoppable. A socialist world is possible and necessary. Thanks.
Is unstoppable. A socialist world is possible. And thank you. Now we will show a video here.
Vi kan göra så här att under tiden så
during the time
kvar, men ställ er gärna upp och sträck på er lite. Så får vi upp lite syre och lite blod i kroppen. Så allihopa, sträck på er lite, ställ er upp. Precis. Så passar vi på
COVID-19 threw capitalism into unprecedented crisis. The inequality, poverty, and oppression that we already battled on a daily basis were dramatically exacerbated as the world entered a new era of turmoil. The lives of working-class people the world over have been upended, bearing the brunt of the misery unleashed by the pandemic. But the class struggle did not wait, and neither did we. Over the last year and a half, International Socialist Alternative has been active in the movements and struggles of the working class, oppressed, and young people on every continent. We've stood shoulder to shoulder with workers in struggle and play an active role in rebuilding a fighting labour movement. We're waging a socialist feminist fight back against gender violence and sexism in all its forms. We're linking the struggle for LGBTQ+ liberation to the fight against capitalism. We've intervened in movements opposing imperialism, war, and racism. We fight for Marxist ideas within mass movements.
solo de Matamoros.
As a threatened ruling class turns to increasingly repressive measures, our members have often been targeted. We've answered with bold solidarity campaigns, defending Socialist Council member Shama Sawan against big business and the right, building solidarity against repression in China and Hong Kong, International Socialist Alternative was established at a time when the need for a world party of revolutionary socialism became more apparent than ever. It's not been easy, but the time, energy and sacrifice of all our members has allowed us to take important steps forward, preparing us to seize opportunities in the explosive period ahead.